I got a freeze dryer last year and it has quickly turned into my favorite way to preserve fresh herbs. The flavor is much better than freezing or drying, and it's the closest thing to fresh that I've found. Fresh herbs are one of my favorite parts of having a garden. I love being able to walk outside and gather the herbs that I need for whatever I'm cooking. Here in the low desert, I can grow most herbs at some time during the year. Unfortunately, I can't grow all herbs all year long, and when I can't have fresh from the garden, the next best thing is freeze-dried herbs. There's often an abundance at the end of the season, and I hate letting all of that go to waste. So putting it in the freeze dryer allows me to have that fresh flavor whenever I need it. Freeze-dried herbs not only have more flavor, but they also retain more nutrients than dehydrated. Freeze-drying also preserves more of the texture that is often lost when you freeze herbs. And in today's video, I'm going to share 5 tips so you'll know exactly how to freeze-dry all those herbs from your garden. But if we haven't met before, my name's Angela from Growing in the Garden, and I love to share garden inspiration and helpful tips so you can be successful in your own garden. The first tip is to harvest herbs at their peak. The better the herbs are when you harvest them, the better they will be freeze-dried. Learn the best time to harvest each herb and preserve them as soon as possible after you harvest. So here are a few tips about when to harvest herbs. Generally, herbs have the most flavor just before flowering. The best time of day to harvest is first thing in the morning. That's when they have the highest moisture content and the most volatile oils. And to ensure more harvest from that same plant, feed your herbs with a liquid fertilizer after harvesting to encourage more production. The next tip is to carefully prepare the herbs for freeze drying. After harvesting, wash or rinse off. Next, remove the leaves and lay the herbs flat to dry. For herbs that have a tough stem, like rosemary, thyme, and oregano, hold one end of the stem. Move the thumb and the first finger of one hand down the stalk, pinching to remove all of those leaves. If you're preparing herbs with tender stalks, things like dill, pluck the fronds away from the stems. For herbs with tender stalks, you can also leave the stalks intact and coarsely chop. For herbs with broad flat leaves like basil, sage, and mint, pluck the leaves along the stem. If the leaves are small and the stem is very tender, leave them intact and use both the leaves and the stem. You can also use freeze drying to preserve thick herbs like turmeric and ginger and garlic. To prepare those herbs, I like to peel them if necessary and then slice thinly and lay flat on the freeze drying trays in an even layer. Once you have washed and prepared your herbs, the next step is to put them in the freeze dryer. It's important to get those herbs into the freeze dryer as soon as possible after washing and trimming. It's not necessary to blanch or pre-freeze. The great thing about freeze drying herbs is that the whole process is going to be pretty quick. Herbs do not have a high moisture content, and they generally freeze dry really quickly. It's usually less than 12 hours from start to finish in the freeze dryer. Store extra herbs in the fridge covered in a damp paper towel if you're processing multiple batches of freeze-dried herbs. So fill up your trays, and you can really fill the trays up pretty well because there is a low moisture content, and then follow the instructions for the make and model of your freeze dryer. For mine, you pre-chill and then press start. Sensors inside will monitor the food's temperature and internal moisture levels. At the end of the processing time, the herb should be crisp and dry. If you need more information about the freeze drying process, I'll link to the video that I have all about that here. The next tip is to store those freeze-dried herbs whole until you're ready to use them. I store them in mason jars with airtight lids. I pack them in a little bit, but I try not to crush them. Leaving the leaves whole preserves the most flavor. The herbs will last indefinitely, but the flavor is most intense if you use them within a year. Label your herbs right away, as many herbs can look similar. And this last tip is to use the freeze-dried herbs just as you would fresh. It's really amazing how much flavor they're going to bring to those dishes. So just as with fresh herbs, the best time to add them is at the end of the cooking time, and that will keep the most flavor in the dish. Use the same amount or slightly more freeze-dried herbs than fresh, but usually less than if you were using dehydrated or dried. And it's not necessary to rehydrate herbs for most recipes. Instead, I just crumble them up in my hand and toss them in salads, soups, dips, or any recipe straight from the jar. Freeze-dried herbs are also a favorite in herbal teas. The flavor is more intense and you will love it. Use these tips to freeze-dry your herbs and have garden fresh flavor all year long. Thank you so much for watching.